Today, we'll be talking about how you cannot trust the government to look out for your best interests. The topic of this video is regulation, but you can't really trust the government to help you in case of an emergency, which is why you should always be prepared. And that's why you should check out today's sponsor, My Patriot Supply. Friends, the coming year is likely to bring more painful surprises. Are you ready? Do you have a plan in case of food shortages, power outages, emergency evacuations, mandates? You should always prepare before these things strike. That's why we recommend getting emergency food from My Patriot Supply. They're America's #1 preparedness company, with several million happy, well-prepared customers. Their food lasts up to 25 years in storage. It's like a survival insurance policy you can eat. When you need it, it will be there. Right now, you'll save $100 on a 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. This kit can get you through any difficulties ahead. You get breakfast, lunch, dinner, and drinks, averaging over 2,000 calories a day. These food kits from My Patriot Supply are selling fast, so hurry and act. Go to preparewithsteven.com and save $100 on your 3-month food kit. That's preparewithsteven.com. To avoid what happens after disaster strikes, act now. Preparewithsteven.com. That's Steven spelled S-T-E-P-H-E-N.
For me, my morality, I guess, to use it your term, is that society should try and diminish and mitigate the suffering of other people.
Yeah, that's a big difference between us. My view is if you want to mitigate the suffering of other people, you should be able to do that freely. To force me to help you mitigate the suffering of other people because it's your value, but if it's not mine, that is immoral. It's immoral for you to impose your morality on me, even if you're in the majority.
Last summer, the objectivist philosopher Yaron Brook appeared on the Majority Report with Sam Seder. They debated for about an hour, covering a number of topics that people like me are interested in. The link to the video is in the description box below if you feel like watching it, which I recommend you do. One of the topics they discussed was regulation. As you might expect, Yaron was against it, while Sam believes we need robust regulations in place to ensure that the products and services we use are safer, healthier, and more honest than they otherwise would be. Yaron believes that decisions that are typically left in the hands of regulators should be left to consumers, and that it's on them to figure out what is in their best interests. Yaron also believes that people are perfectly capable of doing this, and that they'll be much better off making these decisions for themselves than they would be with a third party making it on their behalf.
Why can't I make that decision? Why can't I make the decision whether I want to take the risk of a heart attack and
You're
reduce?
a much smarter guy than most people who have the ability to assess all these different drugs.
I don't assume that. I actually have a high opinion of most human beings and think that they can make decisions for themselves. And I think it's the philosopher king mentality, the philosopher king mentality of Plato, where you get to decide for other people what's good for them.
The Majority Report crew mocked him for taking this position after the debate was over.
Bone up on your drug manufacturing, folks, and on your medical treatments.
And bone up on the buildings that you live in. You may not be made aware that there are structural issues. You may not know, but you should know. You should know, right?
Sam, you were free to go check all those buildings in Miami to help those people on your own if you wanted to. Why are you trying to make Yaron help you on that?
One of the specific regulatory subjects they covered was medicine. Yaron brought up an arthritis medication called Vioxx, which was taken off the shelves in 2004 because it caused people to have heart attacks. First, let's talk about the specifics of regulation and Vioxx. There's a great article from NPR that lays out the timeline of its history. I'll link it in the description box below, just in case you want to read the entire thing for yourself. In November of 1998, the pharmaceutical company Merck submitted an application to the FDA for the approval of its new arthritis medication, Vioxx. 2 months later, Merck began its own tests on the medication, comparing it to existing arthritis medications. They were trying to figure out if Vioxx was safer for the digestion system than previous medications. In May of 1999, the FDA approved Vioxx, and later that year, it appeared as though the new medication did in fact reduce stomach issues as compared to previous painkillers. As more testing continued, however, it appeared as though the people who used Vioxx were at increased risk for heart disease as compared to its competitors. After more studies, battles with the FDA, and lawsuits, Vioxx was voluntarily withdrawn from the market by Merck in September of 2004. In June of 2006, research published in the medical journal Lancet estimated that 88,000 of the 20 million Americans who took Vioxx had heart attacks from the medication. 38,000 of whom died. People like Sam Seder would point to a story like this as evidence that regulation is necessary. Left to themselves, Big Pharma would continue to sell a medication, even one with very harmful side effects, as long as they could make a buck. One of the problems with regulation, though, is that there's always information that none of us, not even the most capable regulators, can know. This medication got approved by the FDA before anyone realized it was hazardous to heart health. Whenever a new drug is introduced, everyone, including regulators, researchers, consumers, doctors, etc., are going to be flying blind to a certain degree. There is a lot of information we can get from tests and other methods, but we're not going to truly know the effects of the medication until it is used on people en masse. There is a type of knowledge regulators do not have because it's impossible for them to get. They don't know what's best for you. Healthcare knowledge, and therefore, by necessity, healthcare policy, deals in probabilities. We all know someone who is incredibly unhealthy, who somehow has incredible longevity. Donald Trump, who only eats fast food, doesn't exercise outside of playing golf, had the most stressful job in the world, and apparently has a very bad Adderall habit, has amazingly made it to 75 years old and is still going. I actually knew a woman who smoked 2 packs a day and made it to 95. All of us also probably know someone who has taken their health very seriously who died very young of natural causes. I knew a guy who jogged 5 miles a day, who, sadly, died of a heart attack at the age of 40. Of course, both of these examples are exceptions. I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure it's well established in medicine that smoking is bad for your health, and physical activity is good for it. So anyone who deals with large groups of people, be they insurance companies or people crafting public policies, must work with probabilities and operate with these things in mind. What they cannot do is make a policy that suits the needs of every single individual. And that's the problem. Because most healthcare decisions are made at that level. Probabilities can tell us a lot, but they can't tell us what's best for any specific person to do. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that taking Vioxx increases your risk of having a heart attack by, I'm making this number up, 25%. Should people be allowed to take it? Well, let's consider that arthritis affects over 50 million adults in the United States. Arthritis can be so incredibly painful to the point where it's literally debilitating. Maybe, if someone is dealing with terrible arthritis, the increased risk of heart attack is worth it. It may cut their life shorter than it otherwise would be, but maybe it's worth it for them to have fewer years of high-quality life than more years of excruciating pain. Maybe not. That is a decision that no one can or should make for them. Maybe they're already on arthritis medications that do an effective job of treating that condition, but the medication gives them horrible stomach ulcers. Maybe they'd find themselves better off by switching to a new medication that gives them fewer stomach issues, but increases their likelihood of heart disease. Maybe not. Again, it's impossible for anyone to tell them what's the right course of action in that situation. The FDA can make general statements about health, many of which I'm sure are true, but that's very different than knowing what's best for you as an individual. And that's why Yaron is absolutely correct when he frames this as an issue of morality and agency.
And the government stepped in and said, you know what, but 10% of you have an increase in heart disease, therefore we're withdrawing the drug, and it's illegal. Even if you choose to take on the risk of heart disease to reduce this excruciating pain, we, the government, have decided you cannot access this drug because we, the government, know what's good for you. So instead of me and my doctor making a decision based on risk that is personal to me, the central planner now dictates, no, 10% risk is too much, so the drug is off the market.
How could you craft a one-size-fits-all policy, like no one is allowed to take this medication, given that so many people have different priorities and values and perspectives pertaining to their own medical issues? In this specific case, Merck took the medication off the shelves themselves. They may have done this because they figured an FDA recall was inevitable, or to avoid further lawsuits and damage to their brand. We don't know. Either way, the larger point remains the same. The second problem with regulation has to do with trust. Who should we trust to make decisions? I will say this for our friends over at the Majority Report. A lot of their logic starts from a correct premise. Much of their skepticism of companies, doctors, shareholders, etc. is warranted.
What do you do about the problem that we had with, let's say, OxyContin, where doctors were making these decisions with their patients, but because of the intense profit motive and because of, frankly, in some respects, the failure of the FDA and the fact that the statutory protections were not strong enough, in my opinion, that we ended up having this use and ultimately abuse of OxyContin that led to a massive opioid epidemic.
It's not necessarily the case that the people who comprise these institutions are bad people, though some of them surely are. Sociopathic CEOs and pill-pushing doctors do exist. Nor is it necessarily the case that they're incompetent, though again, some of them surely are. Amazingly enough, I have met stupid doctors in my life. It's that they're like most normal people. They're concerned about their own interests above all else. Where the pro-regulation argument goes off the rails, and where its adherents display some real cognitive dissonance, is when they talk about regulation in the abstract. Regulatory agencies are not run by supercomputers logically weighing all the variables and making the objectively right decisions, such as those decisions actually exist. They're run by people. And like doctors, shareholders, CEOs, and everyone else, the people who work in these regulatory agencies are reliably self-interested. And this is where the pro-regulation folks are mistaken. Bureaucrats should not be trusted to be neutral third parties, simply looking out for what's in the best interest of the public. Left to themselves, like most other people, regulators will pursue their own interests, even if it comes at the expense of their stated mission. Again, this doesn't make them terrible people. It just means that when faced with the option of advancing their own interests over doing the right thing, most people, most of the time, will do the former. While they may not have the evil goal of pursuing profits like corporations do, presumably at the very least they would like to keep their jobs and perhaps increase their salaries. Who oversees that? Typically, at the federal level, it's Congress that determines each agency's budget and who runs the agency. This means that the political pressures that politicians face over time can carry over into the administrations that politicians fund and staff. This actually happens in international trade policy quite a bit. The United States International Trade Commission is an agency within the federal government that is supposed to direct action against unfair trade practices like dumping, subsidies, and intellectual property infringements. And it's supposed to do these things according to a strict set of rules. Under the WTO framework, an organization like the ITC is only supposed to be able to carry out measures in retaliation. In other words, they can only do anti-dumping measures if they can prove that another nation is actually dumping. As you might have expected, that's not always how they operate. As Tommaso Aquilante, senior economist at the Bank of England, wrote in his white paper, Undeflected Pressure, The Protectionist Effect of Political Partisanship on U.S. Anti-Dumping Policy, commissioners at the ITC are frequently influenced by factors other than the rules set up by the organization. Aquilante demonstrates that the ITC commissioners behave in highly partisan ways based on which party appoints them. Using a newly collected dataset containing all ITC commissioners' votes on anti-dumping over the period 1980 to 2010, this study shows that political parties can affect the ITC voting behavior. First, Democratic-appointed commissioners are consistently more protectionist than Republican-appointed ones. This effect is sizable and suggests that political parties can play an important role on anti-dumping policy by selecting IT commissioners who have a similar stance on trade policy as their own. Second, whether the ITC commissioners vote in favor of anti-dumping depends crucially on whether the petitioning industry is key, in terms of employment, in the states represented by leading trade subcommittee senators in the party that appointed them. Interestingly, pressure seems to be more effective when the case for voting in favor or against anti-dumping is less clear-cut, suggesting that ITC commissioners are more likely to vote in line with political parties' interests when it matters more. Aquilante cites career concerns and reciprocity as incentives for commissioners to vote in favor of the politicians who appointed them. So it looks as though bureaucrats are not strictly following the rules set out for them in terms of trade policy, but pursuing what is in the best interest of their future instead. So, if political pressure and self-interest can affect the way International Trade Commission bureaucrats vote on when to warrant anti-dumping legislation, do you think that maybe the folks at the FDA might think about those things when deciding which drugs to approve? Why don't we ask another leftist YouTuber? Here's Kyle Kulinski talking about the FDA approving a COVID-19 therapeutic from Merck, which turned out to be way less effective than originally thought.
The panel itself is like, this stuff isn't all that good, but we approve it. You approve it? It's not all that good, but you approve it. It has a 30% success rate, and you approve it. Why would you approve it if it has a 30% success rate? 30%. Is that even statistically significant? I mean, maybe it is, but if it is, it barely is. 30% success rate. And why'd you approve it? You wonder why people have an issue with how comfy and cozy Big Pharma is with the government. You wonder why. People look at the way the system works and they go, that's interesting. Merck and Pfizer and GlaxoSmithKline and Johnson & Johnson and all these other pharmaceutical companies, looks like they gave millions and millions of dollars to politicians and their campaigns, and the Democratic Party campaign and the Republican Party campaign. And they're spending a lot of money on politics. And wow, would you look at that? Now the government is making decisions that seem to be very favorable on the side of Big Pharma. Huh. It's okay. I'm sure there's no conflict of interest that's leading them to make bad decisions. That's literally exactly what's going on here.
And this is what I find so odd about people who are pro-regulation. Whether they're progressives or conservatives, whether they're talking about medications, heavy industry, big tech, or finance, in the abstract, they seem to think that regulators will be neutral arbiters enacting wise policy. And yet, when these same people are confronted with how things actually work, they seem to have a pretty good grasp at it. The thing is, it's not some aberration or institutional failure that bureaucracy behaves this way. It's human nature. Like just about everyone else, bureaucrats care more about themselves than they do about strangers. So the clowns at the Majority Report can yuck it up all they like. Yaron Brook is not being fanciful when he thinks that people should figure out what's best for themselves by themselves. He's just being realistic. No one else is going to do it for you.